Sport, welcome again to Don. Nice to see you, my friend. Not seen you forever and a day.
Thank you, John.
Another curious, interesting, debatable subject we've got. The toughest of the tough men that entered our sport, entered our game. And I'm quite sure a lot of the viewers will probably have their own favorites and say this guy was tougher than that guy. But when you talk about real toughness, you talk about real tough guys, let's just go through it. You know, let's start with someone like, I don't know, Jake LaMotta. No, not only an outstanding fighter, but a proper hard knock.
Oh, no, he was tough in the ring and he was tough out of the ring. You know, I mean, he allegedly beat up his own brother and threw him down a flight of stairs in the gym. So he didn't pick his favorites. You know, he would be tough with everybody. Beat up a few wives. I think he was married 7 times. But getting back to a situation in the ring, yeah, he was a guy that was probably be 168 pound or super middleweight today. So we always struggled to make weight, first as a welterweight and then as a middleweight. And then he grew into light heavy, but it was too late in his career to take advantage of it. But he was a guy who had over 70 fights. He was only stopped twice in his career, once by Sugar Ray Robinson in their final meeting after 5 bouts for the middleweight title. He struggled to make that weight. And it was late in the fight, around the 13th round, and Ray stopped him. And then later in his career in Florida, he got knocked out at the very end of his career when he was really far past his prime. But he was tough, strong, a miserable guy to fight, you know, would butt you, would hit you with everything in his arsenal. And he fought some of the greatest fighters of all time, you know, Fritzy Zivik and Burt Lytell and Sugar Ray Robinson and Bob Murphy, just anybody in that group of fighters in that late 40s. He missed nobody and very few missed him.
Rounds, what kind of rounds are you talking? The 15 rounders, 20 rounds? What stage was he in?
Oh, no, he was in the 15-round period. He probably could have gone 20, 25 if he boxed 50 years earlier. I don't think it would have been a problem for a guy like Jake LaMotta. You know, he famously fought a boxer, Laurent Dartwil, and was losing the fight. And he won it by pulling it out by knockout in the 15th and final round, something you wouldn't do today because we only have 12-round fights. But he was not a single knockout punch. He was a mauler, brawler, get inside with the elbows, and just, you couldn't, he was impervious to getting knocked down himself. You could hit him with everything. I mean, he did suffer a knockdown, I guess you could call it that technically, with Billy Fox, which was notoriously found out later to be a dive that he admitted to. He got suspended and eventually got his license back. And they say that's what led him to get the middleweight championship fight against Marcel Sedan, losing so that the gamblers could make a killing. And then they gave him as reward the title fight with Sedan, even though he'd been knocked out by Fox. But as
if you're a fan and you're able to drag up some of these fights on YouTube, and you look at the fighters of yesteryear and you look at the fighters of today with all the technology, all the supplements, the everything that's around us to make these guys super fit. But then you look at these guys like LaMotta that fought like a bat out of hell for 15 rounds in hard fights, not a tip and tap. Then you realize how tough these tough men were.
Oh, no, amazingly tough. You know, a contemporary LaMotta, Fritzy Zivik. Now, he had over 260 fights. He lost 65 fights, but he fought Sugar Ray Robinson twice. He fought actually beat Billy Conn, beat Henry Armstrong 2 out of 3 fights. These guys were fighting almost, well, I would say at that period of time, after the 1930s, probably on average, at least once a month. You know, in 10-round fights once a month, and all their big fights were 15. And in those days, you could have a 15-round fight. It wouldn't have to be for the title. If they say they were 2, you know, noteworthy participants, they would make 15-round fights that were not even championship. So they're just going at it all the time. And then Zivik was another guy, just tough, would fight welterweights, lightweights, middleweights, light heavyweights. Wherever they could get a buck, they would fight those guys.
The bread completely different. Let's move on to another fighter, Chuvalo. What a tough man. What a tough nut.
Yes. The funny thing is his personality is the complete antithesis of what he was like in the ring. If you meet him, he's the kindest, gentlest guy in the world. We got into drug rehabilitation. Not he wasn't a drug addict, but he helped do lectures for helping people in drug rehabilitation and people who were in hard times. He's a great inspiration. He's the Canadian fighter. But to go to his career, I mean, he was stopped twice, but never knocked down officially. Joe Frazier and George Foreman. Foreman was the last part of his career. But he, in fights that he wasn't knocked out, he went 25 rounds with Muhammad Ali. He fought Ernie Terrell in a 15-round fight. He fought Jimmy Ellis in a 12-round fight. He fought 10 rounds, notably with Oscar Bonavena, which was like two cavemen battling it out. Bob Clarew, Zora Foley, Cleveland Williams, Floyd Patterson, every top contender of that generation, Chuvalo fought and was never stopped, never knocked out. He was in the fight of the year with Patterson in Madison Square Garden in 1965 that led to Patterson getting the title fight with Ali, and then subsequently Chuvalo got the fight with Ali and won 15 rounds in Toronto. Then he boxed a rematch years later and he went 12 rounds with him in a fight in Vancouver. Just an incredibly tough, powerful guy. I recall a fight that he had with Jerry Quarry, and he was getting battered around the ring. I mean, he was way behind, in my opinion. And after about the 7th or 8th round, I turned to a friend of mine. It was into the 9th, and said, "This is awful. They got to stop it." He said, "He's down." I said, "Oh," and there was shock. Chuvalo down. No, it was Quarry. After taking a pounding for all these rounds, he had knocked Quarry down and knocked him out in the 9th round, and then went on to fight Buster Mathis after that, and finally George Foreman. This guy, it was only he gave as much as he took and took as much as he gave. Phenomenal fighter, and around till this day, one of the last guys who fought Muhammad Ali for the world championship.
Now, when you've got two tough men that are actually fighting each other, what's got to stand out is, of course, fights like Gatti v. Ward. That wasn't just a display of two tough men. That was a display of complete and utter hard cases that there was no nonsense. There was no kidology there. These guys wanted to fight and fight for fun.
Oh, yeah. No, they were great. That was, one of these rare fights. I said they were $2 million club fighters. Maybe on the skill level, they weren't better. They probably couldn't shine your shoes as a fighter, John. But as tough guys to watch, I mean, they could go every week and you get a full audience on TV and in the arena. First fight, Gatti, remember, he was famously knocked down. It was a majority or split decision. And they gave it to Ward, which set up the rematch. But that was so great. They did the third fight, which you call the rubber match, and Gatti won that as well. Gatti won the rematch. And then he won he won the fight that ended up being the third and deciding match. But look, they could have fought 10 more times and you would have had to sell out every time that they boxed. It was just that kind of a pairing with two guys just perfectly matched with each other.
I'm quite sure a few people are probably looking at it and saying, "What about this fight? What about that fight?" Of course, a proper tough man, heavyweight, Andrew Galata.
Oh, yes.
Come on, man. He was a proper hard case.
He was a brutal guy. I don't think intelligence came much into his plan, his fight plan. I don't think they sat down and strategized. Just throw him in there and he stands up, he'll win. If he doesn't, he won't. I remember the notable fight, the first one, Reddick Bowe, that turned into a riot. He seized defeat from the jaws of victory. He had knocked Bowe down. He was just, manhandling him, and then boom, he fouls him out of nowhere. I don't know what was that, like an animal instinct just to go for it, go for the throat, and you don't have to. And the rematch pretty much was the same way. I'll tell you to this day, John, if you ask people who won those fights, many people would tell you Galata. But as you know, he got disqualified twice in fights that he would have won without any kind of, throwing foul punches. However, he's just stood up. Mike Tyson broke his arm, I think, and that was where they ended the fight there. No, he was a throwback, truly a throwback.
Can I ask you, Don? There's two versions of George Foreman, and I think the second version of George Foreman, the second coming of George Foreman, he was the tougher out of the first version of George Foreman. This guy, I saw him in against Holyfield, and people like the shots he was taking. And no matter what, he'd walk them down and take their shots. And still, to the last second of the last minute of the last round, he'd be trying to give it his all no matter what. Would you put him in that class of tough men?
I definitely would. The fact that he was fighting, winning a world title at 45, and as you brought up, John, accurately, he was there till the last minute. That's how he regained the title with Michael Moorer. There's another fight where a guy was losing, had that great power. But what goes with this power is the stamina. And what goes with the stamina, John, is, like you say, the toughness, the guts to stand up to that and come back. He had a tough fight with Alex Stewart, if you recall. That was a brutal battle with eyes full up. And, he was fighting these guys, of course, on the return, much younger than him because he was into his 40s. But after going, the personal character, after going, I think it was 12 rounds with Holyfield, gone the limit with him, had enough to lose that fight, come back again, and he lost the fight prior to that with another strong, tough guy, Tommy Morrison, lost the decision prior to knocking out Mora. So he had the mental fortitude to suck that loss up, not have it affect him, and come back and win the title, and then go on and keep fighting again for another half a dozen bouts.
Yeah, it wasn't just mental toughness. It was physical toughness because he was getting in with younger guys. He wasn't as fast. He wasn't as snappy, but it had that raw something about him that the youngsters probably thought this was easy pickings. You know, and Michael Moore, easy pickings, then boom, made a mistake. Oh, second up, he's done.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what I remember about Foreman on that comeback. He never sat down between rounds. He always stood up. I remember Angelo Dundee working the corner, trying to get him to sit down and say, back off. So for a 40-something-year-old fighter to stand up every round for 10, 12-round fights, that takes a lot out of you. I always thought the fighter should get rest, but he was adamant that he would stand up between every round and never sit down. Amazing. And then go on to have that kind of a career. I'll tell you, the irony is the only time it was ever stopped was by Muhammad Ali, who people don't perceive as a puncher. But when we talk about tough guys, physical and mental toughness, this is a guy who fought the greatest punchers of all time: Frazier, Liston, Cleveland, Ernie Shavers, George Foreman. None of these guys were knocking him out. And it wasn't until the very end, again, ironically, who stopped him? A guy we perceive as a non-puncher, Larry Holmes. But that was as much age as it was power. But that's a guy who is really tough and doesn't get credit, but he certainly stood up to the best of all time.
So when we're talking about these guys, is it more mental fitness or physical fitness? Because there's no common sense there. I'd think of somebody like Roberto Duran. Roberto Duran, he part of his initiation was fighting in the street fighting, just to prove how tough he was. When he lost to Sugar Ray, that was more of a mental thing. He was like mentally broken because he wanted to get in there in the trenches and have a tear up. When he lost to the likes of Thomas Hearn, because he was knocked out cold. But this man could fight, you know. And so, was it their upbringing? Was it in the head, or was it about brawn and brain?
Yeah, well, you know, most boxers come from a poor background, but there are certain cases like a Duran where they were real lumping. I mean, they were beyond poor, you know, as low as you can get, living on the streets as a kid and walking around, I'm sure, shoeless and literally penniless and hungry, literally hungry, not just miss a meal, but hungry. And he just, you know, he was one of the great fighters, obviously, of all time, and just had a toughness in him. Again, the irony, he quits against Leonard, but that wasn't so much being beaten. I think he was frustrated. You notice Leonard sticking his chin out. I think Duran in his mind said, you can beat me, but you're not going to humiliate me. So the hell with you. And then he came back and vindicated himself by beating Davey Moore, went 15 rounds with Marvin Hagler, a heavyweight. And I really think the true vindication came when Tommy Hearns knocked him out, because he took that shot. It was a legitimate punch. He was knocked out. But even after that, John, the toughness he had, he came back to win the middleweight title, beating another tough guy, Iran Barkley, who was another one who would walk.
Of course, I forgot about Iran. You could shout. I forgot about him.
Yeah,
good,
and Duran beats him, and then goes on, fights for another 5 years. It's incredible, you know. And then they would lose, they would win, but they would keep going. It's just something in them, the desire to be a fighter, you know, winning and losing and just keep going. That's so rare today, because you make
cut from a completely different cloth. Then let's look at somebody like who was a bit of an emotional nerve, tough as old boots. Oliver McCall. This guy still wants to fight now. He actually got in touch about wanting to do an exhibition fight now with me. But he was tough.
Very tough. And again, it's never a fighter that beats him on physical strength. I remember the rematch with Lennox Lewis, infamous rematch. You know, he had stopped Lennox, and then he had some kind of a mental breakdown going in before the fight. He always had, you know, difficulties. I don't know, he's a drug abuser, but he's a wonderful guy. You've met him. He's a fabulous person. Again, these guys are so strange. They're so much different. They look out of the ring than in the ring. People would be intimidated looking at him. But he fought up until now, 50. He was still fighting, still would get a fight, as you said. Now, he's never been knocked out, on his feet, and he fought everybody as well. Lennox twice, Larry Holmes, you name it, he was in with them, and nobody could stop him. And again, the fact he's still going on at this age, and it's not just money, you know, because they can make a living. He's not getting rich on the fights. They just have that endurance, that power, or that desire to keep going.
And I think, you know, when you talked about the mentality, I think with a lot of fighters, when you get in the ring, if your mentality is there, no matter what, you get in. And I remember walking in, I think it was boxing for the world title against Carl Thompson. In my head, I said, they are going to have to carry me out of this place before I lose tonight. So once you've made that pledge to yourself to say, no matter what, they're going to have to carry me out of it before I lose, then that's it. It's like you're hypnotized. It's like, it's gone. And I think that is a lot with a lot of fighters. It's the ones that walk in there and actually think it's a done deal. Like when Lewis got in with Oliver McCall. He didn't have that mentality because he thought this is a done deal. Boom, got knocked out. He's busy filming what? Ocean's 11, or was that with
no, that was the Rock. I think when Rock won, the same kind of situation. Yeah.
So if your head's not there and you've not mentally prepared yourself, then you'll get turned over. But these guys are touching on McCall, Gallotta, Gatti Ward. These people, they mentally prepared themselves for that. Now, one fight that I know is my colleague Adam Smith. He's one of his favorite fights. Corrales, what a tough guy. And again, you're talking about that tough upbringing. You're talking about that mentality of do or die.
They have, they have so much to lose from the top to the bottom, and they've come back from such terrible circumstances that and I'm sure in the back of my, I don't want to go back to that. Now, ironically, a lot of them do, as you say, the careers we talked about before getting on air, where you get the friends and the women and everybody's throwing themselves at you, and once you lose that title or once you lose that fame, they're gone, and so is your money, and you go back to it. But I think that it's just some guys have more desire. It's an inner grit. It's more bottom, I guess. I don't know. Like, it probably applies to football or hockey or other sports. There's just something in them, I
suppose this is why you've got to commend some, champions that go on and unify titles and go on and step up to different weight divisions and win titles like that. Because remember, instinctively as human beings, once we're comfortable and stable, you need a desire, you need a hunter's mentality. But once you've achieved everything you want, the hardest actual thing is actually staying at the top. So you've kept that mental desire. You're still thinking like a pauper. You're still fighting like a beggar, even though you've got millions in the bank. So I suppose you've got to give credit to people like, I don't know, Floyd Mayweather or Marvin Hagler or Sugar Ray. But these are decorated champions that still go on, and so it's very hard to understand what motivates them, because they've got all the money in the world.
Yeah,
but it must be a switch that's just not there.
It's something there, whether it's pride or ego. Again, some guys will have a short run, 25, 30, and they're great for that short period of time. But these guys who will endure and go on, and again, it's not money, because I've had to take a guy like McCall. I mean, he's probably had fights for $10,000 or $20,000 recently. So it's just they want to fight. They have it so part of their DNA. It's so embedded in them. That's all they can do. And I say Duran, some guys would win 2 titles. That's it. Wilfredo Benitez is a great example, a phenomenal young guy, right. And yet, Duran went on. He had all the natural skills. Mike Tyson, another perfect example, great natural skills, but he didn't endure like a Foreman, and he didn't endure like a Holyfield. I think Tyson at his peak was as great as any fighter that ever lived. But
do you think Tyson was a tough man?
People debate that. They put him in like a Sonny Liston. Once he could be intimidated, but I mean, he was a strong, tough guy. I think he's a very complex guy. I think a lot of times the fighter's intellect works against them. So if you're bright, you start to think these punches hurt. Other guys just go in. Punches hurt, occupational hazard, go right in there. So I think at his peak he was. I think that was just so, some guys can't handle the fame at all, John. It just overwhelms them. It's just too much. And I think Tyson sort of got it. Muhammad Ali lived on it. He had to thrive with it. And he was a tough guy. But I think Tyson was. I think he was really strong. I think he just, lost 3.5 years in prison, came out, just couldn't reach that peak again. And I think the pressure on him was so great. But a great fighter, and I think a tough guy. It took a tough, great fighters to beat him, so he wasn't losing till the very end, where he had just nothing left. Yeah.
Let's jump into a few less famous names to the casuals. Joe Grimm.
Joe Grimm. This is the epitome of the tough fighter. He's a guy who fought in the early 1900s, and I mean, he boxed Joe Gans and Bob Fitzsimmons and Jack Johnson, and he wasn't stopped until the very late part of his career. but he probably suffered 90 knockdowns in the course of his career. I think Jack Johnson dropped him 17 times in a fight. Joe Gans 12 times in a fight. Bob Fitzsimmons 13 times. This guy would get up and you just literally beat him to death, and he would, bet against him ever being stopped. And believe me, these guys would try to do everything. He's just an Iron Man. They couldn't believe the punishment. It could never exist today because they obviously stopped it before. And he wound up in a mental institution, which was not to be anything to be surprised by. But yeah, probably the toughest fighter that ever lived in terms of taking beatings, and he'd take a licking and keep on ticking.
Yeah, it's sad because it's sad in a way, the after story. At the time, the entertainment is great. The crowds love it, the adulation and the fame, the attention, the money that comes with it, the riches, the women, the houses, the cars. But then this entertainment that's produced by these tough men that give their heart and soul to do that because they want to fight as well. You forget about the after effects when these guys have retired and their metabolism starts to slow down. And then the sins of their past that start to catch up on them, and that's when you see the grimness of their commitment to being who they are.
Well, yeah, you got to know when to hold them and when to fall. I'm saying full of cliches today, but some of these guys do go on too long. I mean, they do take it. It's a remarkable. If you've met Chuvalo again, now he's starting to fade. I mean, he is in his 80s. As I said, he outlived all of these opponents. He outlived Muhammad Ali. Just naturally tough. LaMotta was 91 years of age, and he was pretty much cognizant and coherent into the late 80s at least, and they married 7 times. But you could have a conversation with the guy, and this guy said, my God, the battles this guy was in with everybody, Some of them, again, some have inherent toughness, but there's got to be a point where say, no, there's no return. You've passed the point of no return. You just got to stop. And I think that's where boxing commissioners come in, after a while and say, look, that's enough.
Don, of course, what about Rocky Marciano? That Iron Will retiring undefeated. They don't make him like that anymore.
No, and there's a unique kind of a fighter because he wasn't a natural boxer. He wasn't a body beautiful like Ali. He wasn't a guy gifted with the incredible ability of Joe Louis or Sugar Ray Robinson, where they rang the bell and those hands just went out in lightning fashion. He had to be literally molded. They've always said he was like a block of granite that Charlie Goldman, his great trainer, turned into a work of art. And he chiseled him into this guy. And what he had is this truly indomitable will to win and a tremendous right-hand punch. And he would just come at you and keep going and going and going. He would be cut. He had been knocked down. He got up and won. He won the world title with Jersey Joe Walcott, an experienced but older fighter, but he was dropped in the first round. It was quite amazing to people. But he got up there, and in the 13th round, behind on all cards, he knocked him out. That endurance. In the fight with Ezra Charles, the rematch, they'd gone 15 rounds the first time, and a remarkably skilled fighter, Charles. Again, older than Marciano, past his peak, but still incredibly gifted. In the second fight, he split Marciano's nose in half. It was brutal. Would have been stopped today, definitely. And for a round or two, he went through that bleeding, and the referee, you can see in the films and watching this, ready to stop this thing. The films are black and white, so you don't get the full impact of the blood flowing from him. And they sent him out there. It was do or die, and he knocks out Charles. Just the guy never stopped. And they said when you hit him, your hands would literally hurt because he was so strong. And just keep going. And again, of all the fighters that people would think would be 49-0 and retire undefeated, I think Marciano, people watched him early and just say, well, this guy's sort of not the most skillful. He's falling into punches. He's throwing punches from crazy angles. Somebody will eventually beat him. But again, it was that just desire that you couldn't, irrepressible desire and heart and toughness, innate toughness that made him go through.
And the thing is, Don, he looked like an average man in the street. He wasn't super tall and had extra reach, or he had that advantage over most fighters. He looked like the average size of a man in the street. He was just tough, and he had brute force, self-belief, and self-want desire, which made his successes, made his achievements even more outstanding.
Yeah, he was the everyman. He was like a blue-collar guy, like a ditch digger, a construction worker would come up and say, put him in the fight, he'll win, he'll lose. And that he stood up, that is a remarkable thing. And Floyd Mayweather, 50-0, he was an Olympian. He was a prodigy. If you looked at Rocky Marciano the day he walked in the gym, you say, go home, son, and take off 10 pounds and come back. You just dismiss him. And that's what they did early. Sort of Al Wilder's manager sort of, didn't worry about it. When he started hearing he's 4-0, 5-0, 8-0, then he said, wait a minute, get my trainer down there. Maybe he's something. And he did something that nobody ever thought he would be capable of doing, go 49-0, 43 knockouts.
We mentioned they don't make them like that anymore. They really don't, do they? You know, you've got fighters now that they just don't seem to have that those cojones, that will, that the desire to do or die in there. And I know it's a mad thing to say, but that kind of commitment, referees are jumping in too early, stopping fights where you can't see the toughness of a fight. And I understand safety's being brought into this, and they think, you know, we know better than you do to take care of yourself, but it dismisses of the chance of actually seeing real tough, hard fighters.
It does. I'll tell you, of today's champions, a guy that impresses me is one of these granitic kind of a guys is Bertabiev, the light heavyweight champion of the WBC.
Totally agree.
Joe Smith. This kind of, you remember the fight? He was cut badly in a fight a couple of bouts ago, and he came through it, and he fought Smith. I mean, the guys will hit him like a Marciano, flush on the chin. Nothing happens. He just keeps coming back and coming back. And he's one of the few that I see today. Again, he hasn't had the situation where they had to let a fight go, but it's so rare. I would say the fighters, they have better skill. They learn boxing technique. When they go pro, they go through the Olympics and international championships, the long amateur careers. I think Marciano had a dozen maybe, or 24 amateur fights at most. And so they're well skilled going in. And if they don't make it early, they're dismissed. So they quit sooner than they do. They won't come back at the 5-6 losses. And then you see them win a world title. That's not happening today, you know. But it's rare. And as I say, they stop fights, lawsuits. The commission is afraid of liability, a lot of other things. So in the short run, it may save fighters, but their careers are ruined. And some of them would have been able to come back. And a loss, John, as you know today, is far worse than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Forget about 50 years ago. It's you lose 2 in a row, you're dismissed. And they don't give them a chance.
You can say that. You look at the likes of Lennox Lewis when he first got his first loss, people wrote him off. What has he done? He got his second loss, he's no good. Now you're talking about Lennox Lewis as being one of the best heavyweights out there at one time. I suppose Anthony Joshua was suffering from the same fate. And people, I suppose the public have been molded into believing if a fighter's unbeaten, he's the best. But it's the fighters that have been beaten actually have all the experience needed to become the best. And so I suppose it's appetite needs to be just sprinkled a little bit, change a little bit.
No, absolutely. One of the great fighters of our generation, of course, is Pacquiao, or this generation. And he lost early. As a flyweight, he grew up into different divisions. He lost to Morales, you know, these fights that he had, tough fights, and lost, but came back. You know, a great fighter overcomes adversity. And I think this era where we manufacture records, 20-0, 15-0, everybody's got to be undefeated. You know, that doesn't give them the skill. And when they lose, I think mentally, a lot of guys are not prepared for it. It breaks them. They say, I lost, that's it. Their confidence is gone. They don't have a chance to come back. So toughness, inherent toughness, you know, you have to go through the wins and losses to know adversity to become a great fighter in many occasions.
The last one, pull out the heart. Let's say McLennan.
Which one? Oh,
the last one. Yeah, Joe McLennan.
Tough, super tough. You know, I mean, we saw the fights, the Ben fights, and what went on at Watson. He was so, there's a guy, I mean, talk about a Hall of Famer. I think he's a guy definitely should be on a ballot. And he had this sort of short career, rose fast, wars, you know, I mean, those battles he had over there in Britain were phenomenal. You know, I think he probably reached a higher peak fighting there than he did here. Got his reputation here, went over there and really sealed it. But yeah, super tough, could give, could take, and fought to the last ounce. I mean, you see the result of it, of course, but from a fan standpoint, and from just giving him for his valor and his you know, his heart, you can't fault that. Again, he paid the ultimate price almost.
Don, it's always a pleasure. I'm quite sure we've missed a few out, and some people will be screaming at the screen saying, "What about?" But you know, there's so many to choose from. We had to choose one or two. It's been a pleasure, my friend, once again.
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure for me as well.